There were so many trees! Mabel couldn't quite remember if she'd seen that many trees in one place before. She could vaguely recall once going to a zoo during one of their foster homes, housing more than just her and Dipper, but at that occurrence, there had only been a few clusters of trees. She'd been so fascinated by the bright green leaves and splashes of color against the dark oak branches that felt so coarse and interesting, she hadn't paid attention to any of the animals. She'd been slapped that day for wasting money. Even then, she'd never seen this many trees. An endless plain of green rolled past, and instead of fascinating her, it made her feel sick. Instead of looking like it would be fun to play in, she felt a deep-rooted sense of being hopelessly terrified in her gut. And she locked her gaze back on the car seat in front of her. There was never much to do between transports. Talking brought up unwanted conversation. Her foster workers, seated in both driver and shotgun seats, were far too risky to speak with, and Dipper's head sat in her lap. His brown curly locks played around his face. His eyes were shut, and she kept a single hand on his chest to monitor his breathing. For once in their entire lifetimes, they were moving without the comfort of one another. Dipper had been fast asleep since they left the hospital, and the foster workers scolded her if she so much as whispered to him. The nurse had said he needed his rest, that in order for a full recovery, he'd be sleeping for a while, but Mabel felt a little worried regardless. Dipper would fight through bears and bullies and even Russian roulette for her. Surely the haziness of sleep couldn't bring her tough and rough brother down. Although, perhaps it could. She longed to hear his voice, to hear his reassurances and that they'd be alright and his promise of a better life. He always brought it up. The idea of running away from whatever foster home they were shoved into, to live in the wild cities or calming towns or winding highways with just each other, brother and sister, twin brother and sister, content with each other's company. They'd almost done it once, but a bad snowfall had pushed their plans away like one of the fragile snowflakes in the roaring winter winds. Tears hung on Mabel's lashes, blurring her vision momentarily. It was a routine she'd found, being stuck in a bumpy car, her and Dipper's duffel bags at their feet, trapped at the mercy of two social workers who didn't know how bad a home really was until something caught fire. Unlike the other times, however, this ride was silent. Normally, Dipper would be the one to quickly diffuse any fears she held about a new home. The nagging idea in the back of her mind refused to leave her alone. In the next home, they might forget us, she declared at the first time Dipper had voiced his concern on her brooding attitude. What if we get lost in the system like Joshua did? Joshua was different, Dipper had replied, rubbing his cheek in a nervous habit, but that rumor in itself had never been confirmed. Joshua had been marked as a weird kid, one who rocked endlessly in the corner of one of their past homes. A complete loner and an outsider that nobody liked. According to the rumors, Joshua had been left behind in an abusive home for years, with his caseworkers too caught up with other kids to remember him. They'd rescued him eventually, but by then, Joshua had stopped talking. He went feral with any kid within 5 feet of him. Joshua had been the only kid Mabel didn't try to make friends with. It could happen, Mabel had always reminded. And the conversation would always happen because they were always going to move. The twins quit letting their guard down years ago when it came to new homes. Sometimes it took a while, but eventually things went downhill in either a slow tumble of events or rapid fire. Beatings or neglect seemed like a constant in every home, and Mabel wondered if it was some type of weird requirement to even be a home. The car bumped and Dipper's head jarred to the side. Frantically, Mabel held onto him, keeping him still, a small whine escaping her as she hugged him close. His bandaged legs stretched out and pushed against the seat, slipping to the edge, and she carefully shifted him into what she hoped was a more comfortable position. She wanted reassurance, now more than ever. Uneasily, she turned her attention to the foster workers, obliviously rocking out to pop music she'd never had the chance to recognize. She wanted a distraction, but she felt more than a little afraid as to what the consequences would be. Sometimes her workers made her laugh and even gave her assurances, but other times, they couldn't care less. Mabel lifted a hand ever so slightly, cradling her brother, as one of the workers seemed to notice. "Quit jostling him!" she snapped, and Mabel, startled at the coarse voice directed towards her, ducked her head to avoid eye contact, instead locking her gaze onto her brother's tranquil expression. She could still feel the worker's eyes on her. Somehow, breathing evenly felt harder, and Mabel sat as still as she could make herself. "You ought to be thankful," the worker called back, shooting a brilliant smile layered with fake ambiguity. Painstakingly slow, Mabel lifted her eyes, just as a cue to show she was listening. "Living in the woods with all this open space. Guy's an entrepreneur. You'll love this home." The twins had become so used to the false statements. They'd grown to let the talk go in one ear and out the other, which meant valuable information mixed with lies completely past them. And punishments was inevitable. Not like it mattered. After a while, it stopped hurting. Mabel swallowed, struggling to clear the dryness in her throat before she continued. "Where is it exactly?" "Gravity Falls, Oregon." The response was from the other caseworker, whose eyes, thankfully, remained on the road, right smack in the middle of the woods. Mabel held onto her brother tighter, his hair tickling her chin. She felt her brother trembling, and through the haze of quiet reassurances, it took a moment for her to realize that the tremors were actually coming from her. Being in the woods meant missing from the radar, and being so far out of the way, neighbors would never get to report. One way to disappear forever, an older foster kid had once mentioned to the twins over an unappetizing lunch, is to be in a home so damn far out, everyone forgets you exist. That statement in itself had kept Mabel from sleeping for weeks. This was bad. This was really, really bad. "Dipper?" Mabel's whisper was hoarse, as if it pained her to speak. Her voice was lost to the caseworkers as they sang to the radio. The car jerked, a duffel flipping onto its sides and spilling its content at her feet. "Are we gonna die?" Of course she got no answer. She felt the tears sting, her nose clogging with the inevitability of sobbing outright. Harshly she fought against it, hugging her brother and meticulously shifting his hoodie. She knew he would have assured her, had he been awake. It would be alright, she hoped.